For everyone, Tutus who has entered the room, we're about to begin, so please have a seat and make yourself comfortable. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to the Honorable Dr. Sharmini Abdullah, as a senior lecturer and research fellow of Center of Excellence for Social Innovation and Sustainable from Universiti Malaysia Perlis, and a very warm welcome to the participant and student from STEKOM University, and also this Zoom meeting today also live streaming in YouTube Universitas STEKOM. Is it indeed a pleasure to have all of you in this memorable occasion, and I would like to thank God for gathering us here in a visiting lecture program regarding effective communication in the workplace. Okay, before we begin, please allow me to read our agenda this afternoon. First session class will be delivered by our guest lecturer, Dr. Sharmini Abdullah. And finally, there will be a question and answer session after the presentation and continue with a brief for a photo session at the end. And we will start for this event today. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind all of the participants to turn off the microphone during the session. Thank you so much for everyone for attending this class today. Thank you so much. And for Dr. Sharmini Abdullah, you can start for this session class today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for making the introductions. Can everyone hear me? Is my voice loud and clear? All right, so I will start. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to all the audience and participants of this lecture for today. So I will share my slides now. All right, can everyone see my slides? Is it clear? Okay, I'm just going to test to see if I can actually move it back and forth, all right? If it's going slide by slide. Right, okay. So without wasting any more time, I will just jump straight into my lecture this afternoon. All right, so the topic of my title, or the title of my lecture today, is entitled Effective Communication in the Workplace. All right, and what you will be introduced to will be, I will just give a slight introduction on what is communication. All right, and then I will talk about what is effective communication in the workplace. I will also explain why is effective communication in the workplace important or critical. And then we'll look into some issues of common communication barriers in the workplace. And lastly, how we can overcome communication barriers in the workplace. So these are the four major sections of the presentation this afternoon. All right, so now I have a question to ask all of you. Okay, are you communicating effectively? Are we communicating effectively? It doesn't matter whether you're a student or an instructor, whether you are in a formal context or an informal context, whether you are actually outside of the university, outside of the workplace, you are communicating with your family members. This is what we must ask ourselves. Are we communicating effectively? Communicate, of course, in the workplace context, as the main idea of this whole presentation, is a very major aspect in the workplace. I think in every day of our lives, we do not go a day without actually uttering a word, isn't it? And communication doesn't mean that you have to make noise. Communication can occur in a non-verbal context as well. Non-verbal means it's like you can be silent, but your facial expression, your body language, the way your eyes, your hands can also indicate a form of communication. Being silent is actually a form of communication as well. So that is why it's very important that we are aware of both verbal and non-verbal in order to create a positive working environment. So how do we create a positive work environment or a positive environment, even in the classroom context, whether it's between a lecturer and a student, or a lecturer with a lecturer, or with a superior with a subordinate? So let's find out how it can be done. All right, when it comes to effective communication, what does it mean to you? If there's any of you who would like to give a response, what do you think? What comes to mind when you think about communication and you think about effective communication? What comes to mind? What does it mean to you? How would you actually evaluate or assess if a particular communication between two people or between more or in a group, it's considered as effective? Any volunteers who would like to say anything? All right, let's look at this cartoon here. Okay, this is what we do. I mean, it's quite a norm in the office, whether it's an education institute or a private company. Meetings is always part and parcel of any employee. All right, so we can see here, all right, you can see that maybe normally at the head of the table is always the big man, all right, the superior, the boss, all right, who's actually making a statement, okay, describing an issue or a statement. But then what happens around the table? How the message is understood or received by the recipients, or what we would say as the listener or audience. You see, not sometimes he says skills, but then as it travels down the table, it goes on as some of the listeners or audience or the meeting members interpret it as spills rather than skills. And as you go further along, it becomes pills. So that is how communication problems occur, because what we say sometimes it's not understood or heard clearly by our listeners. And that causes miscommunication or communication barriers that will affect the effectiveness of a particular communication. So you see now how if maybe you did not speak loud enough, it can cause miscommunication, as shown in the example above here. It's very easy for a listener to actually misinterpret what the speaker is saying. So that is why we have to be mindful of what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and to whom we are saying it. Okay? So what is effective communication? Right? So effective communication is a two-way street, meaning that communication doesn't occur if it's one way. That means if, like maybe now, I give an example. Of course, in today's era, after the MCO, communication was always taking place verbally, non-verbally, on paper. But now, after the MCO, a lot of communication is happening over the phone, correct? Like now, we are having a communication over Zoom, over Google Meet, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Communication is often occurring 24 hours a day. All right, you're texting, you're listening, you're responding. It can be a live situation, it can be an online situation, it can be an email, it can be a memo, how you're responding to a memo or a letter. So that is why for a communication to take place, for it to be effective, it needs to have a response. And the response needs to be appropriate to the initiator of the conversation or the communication. So if you go back, like what we see here, it is a meeting happening. There is an issue being discussed, but why it is not considered an effective communication? Because it is misinterpreted. The person sending the message is talking about skills, but the audience or participants or listeners actually interpreting it in two different aspects. One is skills, another one is pills. So that is why effective communication will only take place if it's two-way, meaning that what I said is understood by the listener or the audience. So for any communication to take place, you need to have a sender, which is the person talking or communicating, okay? So if it's verbally, of course, you hear the person's voice. If it's non-verbal, then it will be coming in a form of an email or a text or a memo, okay? And of course, you have a receiver. If there's no receiver, then it's not communication. That's why it's called two-way, okay? And both play an important role. For communication to take place, it's not only the sender that needs to have a critical role, but the listener as well, in order for a particular communication to be effective. Any questions? Am I going too fast? Is the pace okay? Clear? All right. So effective communication will tell you, how do you know if the communication is effective? Meaning that the receiver has understood what you're trying to say. Otherwise, that's a communication breakdown, as you can see in the previous slide. All right, he's talking about skills, but the listeners understood it as different contexts or different understanding. Skills is interpreted as skills or pills. Okay, so that is why for important effective communication to take place, what you say must be understood by your audience or listeners, okay? And also you have to be mindful. It's not only how we say it, but when we say it, listeners are also looking at our appearance, how our face, how are our eyes, our mouth, whether we are smiling or not, the position, whether we are too far away, we are leaning against. So all these actually play an important role in making an effective communication. As you can see in this cartoon as well, it's not only what we say or how we say it, but also when we say it, like here, okay? The worker is actually asking maybe his superior to look into his appraisals, but it's not asking at the right time, okay? I mean, he's going to the gen, so this is definitely not effective communication. So you also have to see the context of when you want to ask something. You have to assess the situation, whether to ask, when to say it, and what to say. Okay. So far, can you follow the lecture? Any questions? So I've explained what is effective communication, why effective communication is important, and how easy is it to actually have a communication breakdown. All right. So first, we talked about the speaker and the listener both playing a major role. Okay, let's look at the speaker part. All right. As you can see here, most of us sometimes we forget how we sound when we say something. It can be in a normal lecture, can be in a normal everyday casual conversation between friends or in family members or colleagues. Okay, whether it's at the workplace or at an informal area. Okay, but a simple sentence is affected also by how you say it. Like now, if my voice is soft and calm, the listeners will actually be more happy to hear it. But if I shout or too loud, you will automatically shut off. So that is why when you say something, sometimes you mean it, you mean well, but because of how your voice vibrates or travels to the listeners, maybe the tone of it is too loud. A tone is the vocal sound. And then you have the pitch, all right? It's the quality of the sound. That means it's not shrill, like screaming, or too soft, that is very hard for the audience to hear, or the listener to hear. And volume as well, it shouldn't be too loud. Pace, if you're talking too fast, or emphasis, sometimes certain words that we emphasize indicates a certain, how to say, we want to emphasize on something, on what we say, right? And then of course the intonation, where it's not monotonous, where it's the same sound, but we are going up and down. So all these actually also play a role, the sound of how we say things, whether it's a sentence or a speech or minutes of a meeting or an instruction. So as you can see here, in the picture. I mean, the person speaking is actually thinking that the listener is happy, but maybe the way she is saying it, the voice, her pitch, or maybe she's talking too fast, or maybe she's stressing at the wrong places. So the listener is actually unhappy, whereas the sender is thinking that she's actually happy. So that is why you need to actually also be aware, all right, of how you say it. Okay, so of course you need to know what to say, but how you say it also is very, very important, because it will affect the listener's receptivity of your message, whether she's going to take it positively or negatively. Any questions on this? Okay, so I've gone to the next slide. Okay, so just now we talked about what to say and how your sound of your what you say and the sound, how you say it. But now we also have to look at your body language, as you can see here. By looking how a person reacts, a person doesn't need to say anything. You can actually judge whether the person is happy, sad, angry, willing to listen to you, not willing to listen to you. I mean, it's quite common in the classroom, right? You enter the classroom and you see your students yawning. So it shows that halfway through the lecture, you see your students sleeping. So then it shows that there's a communication breakdown. The students are telling that your lecture is boring, but their action is actually saying that they're not interested in what you are teaching for that day. Or you're actually conducting a meeting in the workplace, and then you find your colleagues actually dozing off or not focusing or chatting sideways while you're actually making a presentation. So these are all body language cues to actually tell you that an ineffective communication is taking place. There's a communication breakdown happening. All right. So you can actually judge, okay, whether your listener is actually attentive to you by looking at their facial expressions, by looking at their stand, postures, gestures, and how close you are, and also eye contact. If they're not looking at you, then they are not interested. And it's also the same for you as the speaker. So in order, sometimes you don't need to mention that you want their attention. Your facial expression can actually tell audience that you want them to listen to you. How you stand also shows authority and that, hello, listen to me. How you hold your body, if you're slouching, you have a lazy posture, then you're not going to get attention from the listener. So you need to be confident how you sit, how you stand. It has to be erect. Only then you will actually gauge the attention from the listeners. And also your gestures. Moving too much will be a distraction. Moving too little also is a distraction. So there must be a balance in how you actually move your hands. Sometimes you use it to show emphasis of idea, like how you use your voice to show emphasis, or to emphasize on a point, or to ensure that something gets understood, all right, in a sea of words or sentences. And also how close you are to the receiver. Sometimes you're too close, it causes a obstruction because the listener feels uncomfortable. So you must be mindful of how you are. That means how you're standing, the distance, and so on, to ensure that there will not be a communication breakdown. And eye contact plays a major role. Okay, a very important role in actually ensuring that effective communication takes place. Okay. So far, everything good? Any questions? Right, I'll go on to my next slide. So again, we were talking about the responsibility of both the sender of the message or speaker of the message and to the listener who's actually listening to what is being, to the messages that's being sent. So in order for effective communication to take place, I have mentioned earlier that you need both to play equal responsibility, the sender and also the listener. The person on the receiving end has a responsibility as well. Okay? It's important to be active rather than passive. You're going to be silent, like what happens in a classroom. Your lecturer is speaking, asking questions, or maybe in a meeting, board meeting, the boss is actually asking questions, but nobody is responding. So it shows that you are not interested, and that causes a communication breakdown. So how do you inform? How do you inform that you have, that you're showing interest? Sometimes you don't need to speak. Of course, being listeners, we are silent most of the time, but you can indicate through your posture. So if you're listening towards it, it will actually tell the speaker or the sender that, hey, I'm listening to you. I'm interested in what you have to say, okay? And then you can also ask questions in order for the sender to actually clarify what they are saying, or if there's an instruction, or if there's a point, okay? And then you can actually repeat back to the sender by saying that, oh yeah, you mentioned this. That shows that an effective communication is taking place. So matching and mirroring postures of the sender or the speaker, mannerisms, and type of language gives the impression to the speaker that you are in sync, that you're actually comfortable, and you are actually responding to what the speaker is trying to say or convey across. So being a good listener is very important. So how do we become good listeners? Right here is I'm just giving some examples, okay? It's through your body language, your posture, by asking questions, by re-emphasizing or repeating certain points the sender or speaker have mentioned. You can also mirror the posture of the speaker. So all these are indications to the speaker that, hey, an effective communication is taking place. Okay, any questions? Actually, my slides are prepared for lecturers. If I knew there were students, I would have prepared some games, but now let's go along. Okay. All right, so at the end of the day, what is workplace communication? So we talked about what is communication. We talked about why effective communication is important and how we can avoid a communication breakdown. And then we look at workplace communication. So workplace is a bit different from communication that happens within families, between friends, and in the classroom. All right, because the context of it and the emphasis of it, what the objective of it is different. Whereas in the workplace, everyone is equal. There's no equal in a sense that there might be a class, okay, because you have a superior and a subordinate, but everybody is there to achieve a similar goal. All right, it's for the purpose of whatever company you're working for, whatever institution that you happen to be part of. So it's not only conversations, it's how actually what happens in the workplace that actually contributes to communication. Okay, so it's not only speaking or talking, but actually it's an exchange of information, ideas through different mediums, say what's happening now, verbally, non-verbally, electronically, on paper, and whether it's formal and informal. Okay, as you can see here, if communication break down, and this is what happens, you feel you said something good, but then how it is accepted by your subordinates or by your listeners can differ. So that is why we have to be mindful, okay, what we say or how we say it. So what I can conclude is, for any effective communication to take place, you just remember these three main points. What you want to say, you must know, must make it clear and precise. What are you saying? You already have an idea what you want to say, but how you construct it into a sentence, or into phrases, or into words, you must watch what you say. And then you must also consider what you say is interpreted as how you want to say it. Otherwise, you'll have situations like this, okay, where the communication will break down. Okay. Everyone, okay, can follow? Yes? Okay, now let's go on to the second aspect of the lecture, which is why effective communication in the workplace is important. Okay, when you are in the working environment, you're always given targets. You're given assignments or tasks in order to achieve certain work targets. Okay, so that is why if communication doesn't take place, then it's going to affect the job holistically for the particular company or institution. Okay, so because you need to get work done, all right, it's a bit similar to in the classroom as well when the lecturer gives you something to do. So if you did not do it the way the lecturer wants you to do it, then you know that something went wrong throughout the communication. So it's the same with work. You know, sometimes you have a series of superiors to go through from A, B, C until it gets to you. So if the message or the instruction was not communicated correctly, then the job is not going to be done as how it was expected by the superior, and that causes the job to be not done. It causes monetary implications and a lot of negative effects, because what was instructed or what was conveyed was misunderstood. So that is why communicating the workplace is very, very important. If there's a communication breakdown, and then the company will actually see losses and a lot of negative things that would come to the productivity of the particular company or institution. Okay. So why everybody emphasizes that we need to have effective communication in the workplace? Because it boosts teamwork. You normally work in teams, projects. There's always teamwork. In any working environment, it's very hardly that you're working on your own. You're always working with people. They're always team players because you work in teams to actually push the company up. So when there's effective communication, it helps with the teamwork, leads to better collaborative efforts. And then at the end of the day, the company sees an increase in productivity. Effective communication is down, productivity goes down, and the company goes down as well. So that is why effective communication is very, very critical. Okay. All right. So we see that when there's effective communication, then productivity of the company improves. Teamwork, it's a happy environment. So when staff or employees are happy, they can communicate and collaborate positively, and then the company is a very positive environment to work in. But what happens if you don't have an effective communication? So why important? How do you achieve a positive environment through effective communication? Okay, when you communicate well, it reduces misunderstanding, like in the earlier slide, correct or not? The superiors actually giving an instruction on skills, but then the employees are actually understanding it in either it's a spill or a pill. So then whatever that's being targeted isn't going to be achieved. So it causes misunderstanding. So when you have effective communication, it reduces misunderstanding. So you're clear in your conversation, your employees will understand you better, and they're quick in taking action because it's very clear what they need to do. So when there's no misunderstanding or misinterpretation, then your workflow is smooth and there's no interruption. So when you say A happens. It's not like when you say A and then B, C, and D happens, and then you get back E. You get what I mean? So that is why effective communication is important. Number one, it reduces misunderstanding. Okay. Number two, it creates a positive work environment. If you recall the earlier slide, effective communication boosts teamwork. It leads to better collaborative efforts. Okay. So that is why when you boost teamwork, when there's a positive teamwork happening, there's positive collaboration happening, then it creates a positive work environment. When the work environment is positive between the management and employee, then you can see good things happening. Productivity increases, staff, the trust also happens, because when there's a positive work environment, then the trust between the management and the employee is also strengthened. The team members feel valued, they understand what they need to do, and they will actually perform. So with effective communication, so you need to give out information that is clear and to the point or precise. Clear instructions will make it easy, okay, for employees to know what is expected of them and what steps to take to complete the project. So that is why effective communication actually creates a positive work environment. Not only does it reduce misunderstanding, it creates a positive work environment as well. Number 3, effective communication also helps to reduce communication barriers. Okay, what are communication barriers? Communication barriers is when there's no two-way communication happening or two-way exchanges. So remember, effective communication is a two-way street. All right. So when there's a two-way exchange, it makes it easier for employees to communicate with you. So you as the sender or maybe as the superior, you need to create an open channel, not a closed communication, meaning that you give an instruction, you don't allow employees to actually ask questions or voice out their opinions. All right. So that's what creates barriers. You know, there's sometimes certain contexts you go, you find it very difficult to talk to your superior or even to your lecturer. So you tend to clam up or keep quiet. And then a lot of problems stem, correct? So that is why being a speaker in any context, whether you're superior, you must show employees that you can talk to me. You can actually tell me how you feel, or whether are you able to do the instruction or task that I have given to you, okay? So, and you must also give feedback. And remember, it's not only how you speak, the way you speak it, how you sound, and your body language and facial expression all contributes to how it can reduce your communication barriers, all right? And then lastly, it can help to solve conflict, misunderstanding, okay, and encourage teamwork, okay? Okay, how can it solve conflicts? Okay, communication actually is important because it can resolve disputes or arguments or misunderstanding. So that is why effective communication is important, as it is easy to solve conflicts as soon as they appear, okay? So when there are conflicts, you need to address it immediately, okay? And it's only through effective communication that you can do that, all right? So when the communication is effective, it tells team members, you know, that you can actually, you don't have to list, you do not have to take everything as it is. There's room for you to question, there's room for you to improve, there's room for you to ask. All right, and it provides a good collaboration because there's a collaboration happening between the management and the employees and between the employees and the employees to get something done. Okay, there's a conflict, if there's a conflict, then it's easy for the employee or the team player to actually discuss with their team players and eventually with the management to get it solved. All right, and that only happens when effective communication is taking place. So that is why, like I would re-emphasize again, for any effective communication to take place, there are two responsible parties, the speaker or the sender and the listener. Okay. So remember these 4 things. Why is important? Because it reduces misunderstanding. It creates a positive work environment. It reduces communication barriers. It solves conflicts and encourages teamwork. And when this happens, productivity of the company or any institution will increase. Okay. Okay. So we talked about how to foster effective communication. Why is it important? But what are common communication barriers? Why is communication or miscommunication or communication breakdown is quite a common issue in everyday life, whether it's in work? Sometimes you have arguments with your parents, you have arguments with your colleagues, with your best friends, with your instructor, between the management and the employee. Why? Because of communication barriers, because the sender is not sensitive to the barriers. Okay, and it's quite common, always like human beings. Sometimes we are not mindful and we forget. Like I say, maybe our message is clear, but how we say it doesn't seem polite. That causes a communication breakdown. Or we are nice and friendly and smiling, but what we say is not loud enough or not clear. That causes misunderstanding as well. So this all contributes to communication barriers. Okay, so what are communication barriers? Let's see. Okay, there are quite a number of communication barriers, but I just highlight the ones that are very important and that we are familiar with, and it is part and parcel of who or what we do every day. So a speaker or a sender need to be aware of physical barriers to non-verbal communication. Okay, so sometimes physical barriers are like the listener, you need to be attentive to who your listeners are, know your audience. Okay, because sometimes your audience may be those who are having impaired eyesight. So there's no point if you do visuals because they're not going to see it. Or maybe your audience are from those having hearing problems. So then if you're not speaking loud enough, it's going to cause misunderstanding. Or maybe your audience can be those who are not well. Maybe sometimes in a company meeting, your employees might be unwell at the time. So they are not able to respond as how you want it. So as a sender or a speaker or an employer, you need to be very sensitive to the needs of the listener. Study your listener first before you say what you need to say. Okay, that are physical barriers. Okay, it's very clear to see. So then by knowing or identifying the physical situation of your listeners, it helps you to provide a communication that is more effective. Like I said, if you have listeners who are unable to see, there's no point you give out handouts and show slides because they're not going to see. If you have listeners who have hearing problems, then visuals are very important because they're not going to be able to hear you, but you have handouts, you have proper visuals, it gets the message across. Or if they're unwell, then you need to address the situation in a more sensitive manner. Only then effective communication will take place. Okay, another thing is not being able to see. All right, sometimes you have to listen, right, to the instruction. You can't see who is speaking. That causes a lot of communication barriers because sometimes you are only listening to the tone. Remember, I share a slide on how you sound here. So if you can't see the speaker, you're only listening. So this is where you need to pay attention to how you sound. When you must be loud, when you should be soft, when you should place your emphasis, when you shouldn't, when you must be loud. Only then effective communication will take place. Otherwise, it's going to cause communication breakdown. Okay. So this is why as a speaker or a sender of a message, you need to be aware of physical barriers to non-verbal communication. Are your listeners able to see you when you speak? Are they in perfect health condition? Do they have any physical impairments? That is how you assess the situation before you actually start your communication. Okay, that's one, physical barriers. It's one very common communication barriers. Number two is psychological barriers. This is very common in the workplace. Maybe sometimes in a classroom setting, you might see it between your friends and a lecturer. If a lecturer is too strict or too forceful, you know, then you might see some of your friends having low self-esteem or maybe having anxiety. They're not able to respond to the instructor or respond to the management because they're afraid. So they start to stutter. They start to feel nervous. They sweat profusely. They're unable to speak or present nicely. So as a sender or a speaker, you need to be attentive to this. Okay, you need to be very, very sensitive or empathy to the psychological situation of your listeners. All right, so if you have somebody with low self-esteem, then you need to be more sensitive. You can't be forceful or strict or imposing or domineering. And then it will cause a communication breakdown. Both parties will be frustrated. You'll be frustrated because you're trying to get the person to do something, but it's not happening. And the person will even be more affected by the whole situation, causes the person to have even a much more lower self-esteem, won't be able to perform. And that is when you have staff who's not performing. So that is why being the management part or the employer, or when you have an instruction to give or to get a job done, you need to actually look into psychological barriers as well. Okay. So not only you are looking at physical barriers, you also have to consider psychological barriers. Okay. So far, can you follow? Everyone, okay? Then we have emotional barriers. So earlier on, we talked about physical, psychological, which is your mental state of your listeners. And then you have to also look into the emotional state of your listeners. And it also leads to both sides, how you respond and react. Okay, so you need to be attentive to this. Sometimes in a meeting or a discussion, things get heated up. Okay, maybe your employees does not want to do what you ask them to do, right? But you as the speaker or the employee must not get angry fast. When we get angry, that is when breakdown happens. So we must be able to control our emotions from both sides, is whether you're the speaker or the listener. Sometimes it is very difficult, right? Me being the head of department in the past, there were times I actually blew my top as well, and that caused a lot of communication breakdown or problems after. So, it's very hard to control emotion, but it's a very critical, because once the damage is done, it's very hard to retract. Once certain words are said, you can't actually pull it back. So, and that causes a communication breakdown, misinterpretation. Staff would be very stressed and will not want to respond to you in future. So that is why emotional barriers is very, very critical. Okay, so we already talked about 3, right? Physical, psychological, which is your mental state of both speaker and also the listener, and emotional barriers, where it also affects both the speaker and the employee, the management and the employee. And also we have a 4th one, which is quite common, organizational structure barriers. Okay, we looked at personal, where we looked at physical, we looked at emotional, and we look at psychological. Now let's look at the bigger picture, how the bigger picture can also affect the ineffectiveness of a communication. What are organizational structure barriers? Okay, actually, if you're working in a normal company or in the same country with the same mindset, you don't normally experience this, but sometimes you do. Sometimes companies have unclear structures, so unclear, that make communication difficult. Okay, for instance, maybe there's a hierarchy, all right, like maybe a certain employee is unable to go to their superior to actually convey a certain thing, because the structure or the direct line of communication is not clearly stated. Or companies, employees come to the company, they do not know what they need to do. The company does not, or is not clear with the targets of what each employee needs to do. So that causes misunderstanding, because I'm here, but I do not know what I need to do for the company. It is not clear. All right, or they do not know what their role is, what I need to do, or who can I talk to. So this causes a lot of communication breakdown. That's why organizational structure has to be clear. That's why you see in every company there's a chart, right? Like who's the big boss, and then you have the subordinates and the workers, and the line of communication, who I can speak to and what I need to do. Everybody's placement in the company has to be clearly stated. What is my role? What I need to do at the end of the day? Who can I speak to? But if this is not clearly stated, then it causes communication breakdown. Okay, all right. Any questions? Okay. And then this is quite common actually, especially when you are in a Like in Malaysia, we have so many races, so many languages. I'm sure in Indonesia it's the same. I've been to Indonesia many times, and I know you have a rich language. Now, I was in Surabaya, and I know there are so many dialects. Just in a small, in one area. So this is quite a common cause of communication breakdown or ineffective communication, semantic and language barriers. Sometimes what we say can mean positive in our language, but in a different dialect, it's actually meaning something negative. So we need to be mindful. So language differences between the speaker and listeners can cause communication breakdown. Sometimes you don't understand the accent, the jargon, expression, or even slang or technical terminology will actually cause communication breakdown. So you must be mindful. That's why you need to study who your listeners are. It's very important. Then you will know what words to say, what rightful expressions to use without causing any, not making your listeners angry or unhappy with what they have to hear when you use the wrong words because of the differences in the speakers and listeners. Okay, so you're not offending them, even though you did not mean to, because you were not or ignorant or you did not study your audience well, then it causes misunderstanding, communication breakdown. Okay. Then lastly, we come to cultural barriers. Similar to semantic and language barriers, culture, yes, always come from different culture. In Malaysia, we have the Chinese culture, the Malay culture, the Indian culture, the indigenous culture. Always come with cultures, with certain standards, with certain expectations, with certain norms. So we need to also be aware as a speaker, what our listeners, what are their cultural barriers, what are their cultural orientation. So cultural barriers can interfere with communication in many ways, such as personal space. For certain cultures, all right for you to stand close. For certain culture, you need to stand. So by being mindful of this helps with effective communication, okay? Sometimes you have a stereotype of another person's culture. Maybe for that person, it's all right to do it, but for it is not, because it's considered impolite or you shouldn't do it at all. So that is why when you work in international companies, you need to be very mindful of cultural barriers. Okay, say maybe one day you might not be working in an Indonesian company, you might be employed in a Japanese company, or maybe in an American company, or maybe in an African company. You will, of course, you'll be seeing language barriers, but at the same time, you also have to adapt to the culture of that company. Their norms will be different. So that is how you need to adapt yourself in order to avoid communication breakdown. Okay, all right. Any questions so far?
For question, for our
later.
audience, will
Okay.
asking
Okay.
after the presentation, Miss. Thank you.
So I'll just proceed now. Okay. All right. Then we'll come to assumptions, jumping to conclusions, and premature evaluations. This is normally on the speaker side or the management side or the employer side. Okay. Sometimes as a big boss or as the superior of a group of people or the leader of a team or a group, sometimes you have these impressions where it will affect your judgment. Okay, so sometimes you don't even know the employer, but you see the person you have a dislike. Indirectly actually influences the way you communicate. You may not be friendly towards the person. The way you give an instruction may not be as nice to a person that you like or to an employee that you like. So this is actually, that is why being a speaker or an employer, you need to be very neutral. You need to be very sensitive. You need to be fair in what you do. But sometimes being human beings, I think it's quite common. So you see your lecturer favoriting one particular student or two particular students above the rest. Yes, it's human nature. But in the workplace, you need to be professional. You need to be mindful of this. Sometimes you see somebody, you don't know actually what the person is going through, but you form assumptions. You already have, and you already evaluated the person, maybe not in a positive way. You already jumped to conclusions before actually even knowing the person as it is. That causes a communication breakdown. So this is actually very, very important. And sometimes people, it's very important to know to listen to another person's description of another person. This is what I mean by jumping to conclusion or premature evaluations. A good speaker will actually know the person as it is, not base your judgments on comments or remarks or descriptions made by a third party of that individual. So this is very important to note, okay? So apart from identifying the physical barriers, the psychological barriers, all right, where it deals with a lot of mental health. We have the cultural barriers. We have the organizational structural barriers. We have the semantic and language barriers, all right? We have the emotional barriers, and this is also another critical aspect, how we can actually avoid a communication breakdown, okay? So we must, it's very important to avoid making assumptions. Do not jump to conclusions before you're actually sure what the situation is, and do not make premature evaluations of your employees or even the situation as it is, because it will lead to misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and a lot of problems, okay? So that was the third part of my lecture, where I talked about what are the common communication barriers, right? Now, how can we overcome it? All right, we already identified for any effective communication to take place, you need to, for anything, you need to know the problem. Once you identify the problem, you need to find ways to overcome it. Only then you can actually achieve a positive result. So to communicate effectively in the workplace, you need to be aware of the barriers, like I mentioned, the 7. Okay, you have the physical, psychological, emotional, cultural, language and semantic. What else? Organizational barriers, and of course, assumptions, premature evaluations, and judgments. Okay, so now you know these are the common barriers. How do I avoid this? How do I overcome it? Okay. So as a speaker or an employer or the management, you need to hold open meetings. What do I mean by open meetings? That means you have a very transparent communication meeting. It's not closed, it's not secretive. The employees are free to voice out, and there's an exchange of discussion. That's what we mean by open. Everything's out in the open. It's not secluded, it's not discreet. So employees know what is happening, and employers or the management also is giving opportunity for the employers to have a discussion on any issues or any tasks or any instruction. Emails is actually one way to avoid, to overcome barriers as well. Because when you write instruction on paper, okay, you're actually eliminating the sound, how you sound, the body language, and it can be very precise, okay? Sometimes when you deal with difficult employees, maybe some in class, sometimes you have a friend who is very uncomfortable to speak in the public, but when you isolate them, they can really perform. It's the same in the working environment. So if you can identify workers that are not functioning well in a group, you can actually take that individual out and have a one-to-one conversation to iron out any problems and to ensure that the task is done effectively or as instructed. You have to create a receptive atmosphere. What is a receptive atmosphere? Receptive atmosphere means you're actually telling your audience or listeners or your employees that you can talk to me. If you're not sure what you need to do, or maybe you need an extension of a deadline, come and talk to me. All right, so that is what we mean by receptive. You're telling your employees that I'm also listening to your problems. I can negotiate. We can compromise. So this is what it means by receptive atmosphere when you create the situation or the context, okay? And you must listen. As a speaker, we always expect our audience to listen to us, but you must remember that you have to show your listeners, your employees, that I am also listening to you. Okay, so that is only where you have a two-way communication. Okay, not one way where I talk, you do what I need to do, no questions asked. That causes a communication breakdown. Okay, use simple words. Remember, if you use too bombastic words, sometimes your listeners do not understand, and that causes a breakdown because they do not know what they need to do. They misunderstood what you said. So that's why use simple words. Use visuals, like I say, because sometimes visuals help with the physical barriers, okay? Use body language, like I mentioned in the earlier slide. It's not only what you're saying, but how you say it and how you look when you say it. Okay, so that's why body language plays a critical role in making sure that communication is effective. Use presentations is similar to visuals. Don't speak blindly when you're actually talking to a group of people. Make sure you have a presentation slide. Okay, and always encourage feedback. Not only talk, like one person talking. When there's only one person talking, it is not effective communication. So you should stop in between your presentations to actually get feedback from your listeners. Be articulate, meaning that you need to pronounce words properly, clearly, precisely, so that they do not mishear you. Okay, like the first example of skills, how it's listened to or heard as spill and pill. So that is why you need to be articulate in whatever language you are speaking or presenting. Okay, do not mumble. That means do not speak softly. When you speak too softly or you mumble, it's going to cause misinterpretation and eventually a communication breakdown. Act out your message. It's very important for an employee or a management. You always tell your employee to do things because that is the nature of a work environment, but lead by example. This is what I mean by act out your message. You want something done, you show to your employers that I'm also doing it. So we do it together as a teamwork. It's not a point like you do it. So that is what I mean by act out your message. You want employees to do something, you must set an example, okay? And whenever you're speaking, no matter how unsure you are over whatever you need to present, you need to always show you're confident and serious. Only then the listeners will take serious into what they need to do and get the task done. If you're not going to show any confidence, you are not serious in what you want your employees to do, then you're going to see your task not meeting the deadline. So that is why, even though how unsure you are, you must always show confidence and seriousness. Lastly, be appreciative of your employees. Show them thank you. It's not difficult to say thank you to somebody who's had done something for you. Give a bit of praise. Wow, well done. That actually encourages a positive working environment. So the communication is effective. The employers feel appreciated and they will actually work harder for you. Okay. So how I'll summarize: in order to have effective communication skills, you must connect with the audience. Okay. Use simple words. Body language, you must be mindful. How you smile, your eye contact, your gestures, your tone. You must be sensitive to your listeners' cultural background. Okay, then you can avoid the cultural barriers. Must always stop in between to check for understanding. Get feedback so that you know that they understand what you're asking them to do. Always seek participation. Make sure that your listeners are involved in what you want them to do, not an outside entity, but rather we are doing it together. Ask effective questions. And always at the end of the presentation, you summarize what has been presented or what task they need to do or any instruction, right? Coming on to my last slide. So these are some of the 9 ways, okay, to overcome the barriers to effective communication. So you have to make your ideas clear. Remember, use simple words, be articulate. So ensure the time of your communication is good. Remember when to say it. It's not how you say it, but when you say it. Okay. Use a language your receiver can understand. Like I said, simple words. Okay. Make your message to the point and short, precise. Okay. Checking if the other person has understood your message. That means you can stop in between, ask them questions to see whether they understood what they need to do. Take care of your body language, tone, and content of the message to make sure that you do not offend anyone. Okay. Listen before you speak again. Make sure that you are also telling your listeners that I'm also listening to what you have to say. So it's not a one-way, it's a two-way. Do not interrupt when someone else is speaking. This is very important. Sometimes you do find that when you're talking in the middle, somebody just cuts you off. That is not good. So you need to be mindful of that. Let the person talk first before you respond. All right. And lastly, make your message judgment-free. Like I said, avoid premature assumptions, evaluation, or judgments. So with that, I actually am done with my presentation. So we will go to, do you have any questions?
Thank you so much for presentation, Dr. Sharmini Abdullah. And for our audience, if you wanna asking question, you can raise in your hand or you can write in the room chat. Yeah, for first question, we have Miss Rajeswari.
Okay.
Yeah, for Miss Rajeswari, the time is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miss Novita. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
My name is Rajeswari. I am from Information System Department.
Uh-huh.
So I have some questions regarding to your presentation.
All right.
I'm so sorry before that I couldn't open my camera. Is it okay?
All right, no problem.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. As you mentioned about organization hierarchy, but you just mentioned about there is no clear statement about who that employee can meet to deliver their opinion or their whatever they are trying to say. Sorry. So yeah, but I would like to be more specific about, especially in top-to-down approach in organization, especially in formal communication. There is often happen about miscommunication in top-to-down approach. So why it is happen? Because as we know that there are two type of communication, oral and written. If something cannot be understood by oral communication, it can be understood by written. So why in top-to-down approach, it's still how to say it, quite often happen miscommunication happen. Yeah.
Okay, let me rephrase what you're trying to ask. Okay, Rajeswari. Yeah. So I think you're talking about organizational barrier here, right? Meaning that when there's a top-down instruction, why there's still a miscommunication? Maybe the instruction has already been said either verbally or maybe on printed form.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why I said, if you recall how to overcome it, it actually falls on the fault of the management. Okay. When an instruction is passed down, we are all in Asian culture, correct? Asian culture is very different from Western. Western has an open concept where even if it's the big boss giving you an instruction, you can be a small anchovy or a small potato in the company, but you can actually ask the person. You can see that person. There are no people to. There are no gatekeepers telling you not to go and ask for clarification. Correct. We are used in an working environment where when the big boss says do A, you have to do it. They leave it to you to interpret it, correct? And then sometimes you don't have proper instructions, proper clarifications. You're not allowed to ask questions on how you should do the assignment or the task. And then when you do it wrongly, you actually get shouted at or penalized. Am I right?
Okay.
So that is why we have to change that mindset. This is quite common in Asian cultures. I mean, I've experienced also situations where that an instruction was given. We were not clear and we were not able to actually meet the deadline, but we couldn't actually inform the person who actually gave us because there were too many gatekeepers. So this is why we need to actually change that paradigm shift in maybe when you go into the working environment later on, who knows, maybe you would be holding a very big position. So that is where you come in to actually change that mindset, change that context. Asian culture is very, it's so rigid, right?
Yeah.
The boss says do A, you do it, whether you can do it. They ask at 8 o'clock at night, you have to give it. 12 o'clock midnight, you have to do it. Am I right? So it is us to change, the new generation to change that concept. And sometimes we are not brave enough to voice it out because it costs you your job. Correct. That is why we keep silent. And that is why the same pattern is repeated again and again and again. So it's actually, of course, the management has to change, but if the management doesn't change, it's up to us. When we hold positions, we do it differently. I would say that that's what I did when I entered the university. Being a normal language teacher, of course, I had to do a lot of things. No questions asked. The dean says do A, you do it. Over the weekend, do it. I want it at 12, you do it. I want the speech in half an hour, you do it. But when I came into a position where I was in the administrative role, I changed that because I didn't want my employees to go through what I went through. So you change that structure. So it's, so it has to come from us. If the management doesn't see it, so maybe one day when you come into that position, you change that, you create that paradigm shift, and believe me, it will take effect after that. You will see changes. So to say how to solve it, we know how to do it, but whether the person wants to do it or not, that's the question we ask. So I hope I answered your question actually.
Actually, I would like to interrupt. So, according to your explanation, that it is because of lack of details. But what I would like to ask is actually, in your first, in your beginning of presentation, you said about people who misinterpreting about skills, and what is it? Yes, something like that. It is what I actually would like to ask. Yeah, because of that hierarchy, like top level, middle level, and low level. Yeah, the content of the message, it's changed itself because of that hierarchy. So the meaning of the content is changed. So why it is happened? That is actually my question. Because as we know that there is oral and written. So there is no chance about that message can be changed. So yeah, then how is it possible that the message can change and misinterpreted by the employee?
Okay,
So
because all right, I get what you're trying to say. That means it's like a chain letter, like when you whisper to one person, at the end of the 10 person it gets. So this one, how to avoid it is actually the person conveying the instructions needs to be clear. Say, all right, you are the 10th person to receive that task. Correct. You have 9 others actually passing down that instruction, the same instruction given by the employee. So when the employee says to the 9th person, to A, that person needs to actually get proper clarification from the big boss as to what is needed to be done. So when they're conveying it along the line, so the role of you, say if you are, you need to ask. Only then the person at the bottom will actually get what was rightfully needed. But how to say,
they are afraid to ask.
Sometimes along the way they're afraid, maybe at the time the task was given, the big boss was shouting, you do not know what happens. But it takes if you, for me, I always ask, I never, even if I was afraid person, I wouldn't, if I was afraid to see, I send an email, I leave a memo. And that is how I actually overcome those things. Of course, sometimes to see the person might not want to see you, but you can always pass messages or memo to ask for clarification. If they did not answer, it's fine, because when something goes wrong, you have something to back up. I actually asked. You get what I mean? So always safeguard yourself. Don't take everything blindly. If there's a question to ask and you find yourself not being able to do it on a verbal context, have a written communication, pass a letter, CC it to whoever that's relevant, so that if something happens, you don't get a response. A lot of people actually had seen that you were asking questions on how to do the task. I hope that answers your inquiry.
May I ask one more?
Yes,
Maybe?
of course.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned about physical barriers,
Barriers.
but it is from audience side. But how if that physical barriers from the spokesperson side? As this, let's say that spokesperson have a limitation for eyesight. Let's say he is blind, but he actually he has a great communication skill. So is that mean that effective communication would not be achieved?
Actually, no, it depends. That's why I said it depends on two parties. Okay, if I was, this person was having a sight impairment, like you said, he cannot see, but he can communicate effectively. Like I said, communication doesn't mean that you need to see the person to communicate, correct?
Yeah.
But then it's also the receiver or the person actually giving the task. So sometimes if you know that the person can't see, why make it difficult? So provide braille. You know, this is what management needs to be sensitive. You understand? So this is what I mean. But how many companies actually are sensitive to the needs of those in physical disabilities? I can tell you in Malaysia, it's very minimal. You know, even a person going on wheelchair, it's so difficult to actually walk around in Malaysia. I don't know in Indonesia, but I've been studying. I studied in the UK. You know, they even have pathways. The buses actually have ramps for wheelchairs to go onto. So communication doesn't mean what you're speaking, you know, communication is also action. So we haven't, maybe one day in the future, let's hope that, you know, in our country, in Malaysia, Indonesia, that we will have that sensitivity in work environment. Okay, let's go even to the university. How many of us are actually sensitive to the needs of the student with special needs? How many universities actually take in students with special needs? We can count.
It's countable.
Yeah, and you know, we had our uni does take in disability lecturers, and we have some students which we help, but we don't have that facilities. We don't have the funding to help them. We can cater to one, two, but we can't cater to many. So that is why, I mean, we try, of course, I mean, being Asian countries and we are developing, of course, financial is always the reason why we are unable to do a lot of things. But in future, if you find yourself around a physical person, then we need to actually provide alternatives, like, you know, like the person can't see, then you should give memos in Braille because the person can read in Braille. Or if you don't have Braille, then make sure that they listen to the instruction. Communication will take place. There are many forms of how we can do things. We just need to open.
Actually, ma'am, what I would like to point that about the blind person is the spokesperson, the communicator, not
the person who's communicating. All right. So center version.
Yeah. So how is the attention will be same? The effective communication will be achieved if the communicator is the one
who's having physical impairment.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to Stephen Hawking? You know Stephen Hawking? The person actually came up with black hole.
Okay.
All right. He couldn't even talk. Couldn't even move, but he used the help of technology.
Okay. Like Stephen Hawking. Oh yeah, Stephen Hawking. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we talk about physical impairment, say I was a speaker and, you know, I was having some sort of physical deformity. Remember, we have technology to help us and you need a good assistant. Obviously, we can't do it on our own. So the organizers also need to be sensitive and provide the technological aid that the person needs in order to be the speaker.
There must be a support from every aspect.
From every aspect, obviously.
Okay. One more last question.
No problem, Rajeshwari, please.
Okay. How important about a brainstorming technique in order to achieve effective communication?
Okay, this is what we mean by open meetings. When you have an instruction, it's always good to elicit ideas because sometimes, like you said, it avoids assumptions, correct or not?
Yeah.
Sometimes we feel that, oh, if I say this, you know, maybe they will not be able to do it. But believe me, maybe you have a problem, you need to communicate it, a problem at work, a task that needs to be done, but it's very difficult to get it done. So that's when you sit with your team members and team players to have brainstorming. Brainstorming is actually a very good way, effective method to actually solve problems. Because it allows everyone to actually voice up what they have. and you're discussing it in an open context. It's not closed, it's not individualized, it's not discrete. You get what I mean? So I always recommend brainstorming because it helps to create a lot of problems. I mean, solve, not create.
So, yeah, okay. Okay, great. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for answering.
Thank you very much, Rajeshwari. Thank you for your really very interesting and impactful question.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for Miss Rajeshwari. And then we have a question from audience in a YouTube and in Zoom. We have 10 questions. Yeah.
Right?
Okay, first question, this is from Hamida.
Okay, Vida?
But sometimes as a listener, I cannot rebuke the speaker who feels he is the master of the stage because some speaker don't give the audience a chance to speak. How to overcome this, Miss? Thank you.
All right. So what if I understand your question is like you have been in situations where you are not allowed to ask questions. Can I like clarify? That means the speaker, of course, normally when there's a presentation going around or there's a instruction happening, you have to allow the speaker to speak. But then does that mean that the speaker did not give any allowance for any of the listeners to ask questions? So how do you solve that? I mean, if it's in a meeting room, we can actually pass a note, you know, but if it's in a formal context, if there were no room for, I mean, you can raise your hand. I mean, if the person doesn't want to answer, then I don't know how to actually answer this, but for me, it's up to the organizers and also to the speaker themselves, because like you said, then that speakers actually not advocating effective communication. It's not two-way, it's one way if the speaker doesn't give room to the listeners to actually ask questions. So that is wrong.
Okay.
So I hope I answered the question, but if you really need to ask something, if you can't, if you raise your hand, it is ignored. Write a note and pass it to the front. Because sometimes the organizer, you know, you have a MC, sometimes for any, I mean, in a board meeting, obviously you can pass the note right up to the boss's chair, and if he looks at it, he will address it. If it doesn't, you try. If it's in a big hall, you can raise your hand. If it doesn't work, then you pass the note right up to the MC. So sometimes they read out, sometimes they don't. Like, but certain situations we can't control, we as the listener especially.
Okay, thank you for answering. And the second question, we have question from Amin Tohari.
Okay.
What is effective communication skill for works, school, college, and life in the world, specifically to face in era society 5.0 in the next 2023 until 2045 mention? Thank you.
All right. Okay. You're talking about the communication evolution here. Okay. If you go on back to the beginning, the caveman era, you know, they would leave pictures to communicate, right? Sounds. And then we evolved creating paper where we could actually write, right? And then, of course, then we came to the, of course, you have when language was evolved, you know, from words that didn't make sense. We have proper language systems. And then we evolved to using technology to help us to get our communication or get our messages across further with the normal dial phone. I don't know whether any of you still have it in your homes. Okay, some offices, we still do it. You have the fax machine. All right, then you have, and then came the emailing when it came to the production of the computers, correct? So you have the emails, the fax, and then of course, now everyone can't live without your phone. Am I right? So we communicate actually most of the time. If I'm looking at the generation now, I don't think any of you even use emails. Am I right? It's only in a workplace, yes, we use emails. But if you're looking in institution or as a student or even in non-formal, we're actually communicating more on WhatsApp, Telegram, correct? Twitter, you have your video call. Even we don't have meetings, so sometimes everything gets done on the phone. So that's how communication has evolved. We're going to ask him what's going to happen in 2045. I'm not so sure how, but I think every to make an effective communication, there must be a question and answer. There must be a two-way response. So it's just same like when you're texting somebody, the person doesn't respond, then it's a communication breakdown. Or when you ask something on, it doesn't matter what platform. In order for effective communication to take place, there must be an answer that is needed by the listener and needed by the speaker. There must be a question and response, two-way. When you see only one way happening, then it's not effective communication. So whatever it is, whether it's on technology, on the latest communication methods, for all I know, next time we'll be using drones to convey things, holograms. I do not know what's going to happen to 045, but for now, in our present 2022, 20th and 21st century, we have a lot of communication on the phone, right? So we need to know the ethics. Ethics mean what? There are also certain time where you can text and you shouldn't text, correct? So you need to be mindful of that as to when to ask or when to text. I hope I'm answering your question. So of course, effective communication takes place when you have to consider these aspects as well. You need to also see who you are sending the message to, how you write the messages. Don't write in short forms, in acronyms or in slang. If it's a formal situation, you have to text properly. Don't use bombastic words and be mindful of how you say it, when you say it, all right? And to who you're saying it or to who you're texting, okay?
Okay, thank you. And the third question we have from Sharmini Abdullah.
Okay.
How the art of body language relate to communication? And next, question from Evi Hernawati. Why is effective communication important with public relation? Thank you.
Okay. All right, so to the third and fourth questions, body language. Okay, why is body language important? It's basically what you see. I mean, I can say like this, okay, if I don't smile and say something, how's your reaction? It's like you ask me a question, I'll be like, okay, fine. Oh, my voice is so low. So it's how, and my facial expression, if I was like, do you want to ask me a question? No, right? But I was smiling, you are approachable and warm. So that is why body language is important. It's not only your arms and your legs and how, but it's actually also your facial expression and also your sound, how the message is conveyed. Okay, so that is why body language actually influences how effective a communication is. Okay, and to see whether public administration, okay, normally when you are working in a service context, okay, you're dealing with public, you're dealing with people. That is why you need to be sure that you are able to communicate effectively. It's very different. Certain jobs, you only, your job is only to type letters. You don't meet people, so it's not so critical. But then again, you have to be mindful of written communication to make sure that what you write or what you say, it's sent across effectively. But in public administration, you're actually dealing with people. When you deal with people, that is why you need to ensure that communication happens two-way to avoid misunderstandings, to avoid conflicts. Basically, because you're dealing with people. When you deal with people, there's always room for misunderstandings to happen. So that is why you need to be mindful to ensure that communication is effective at all times. Okay?
Okay, I got it. Thank you so much for answering. And then we have a question from Willis Basuki. Is
Okay.
there any way for us to measure or access effective communication, Miss? Thank you.
All right. Like I said, if you look at, I hope the slides will be shared. So there are ways to overcome communication breakdown. Like I said, be an attentive listener. Okay. When you speak, you must also be able to listen. And then you have to use simple words. Don't use bombastic words. Make sure your expression is always kind, warm, smiling, soft, not too soft until they can't hear you. Don't be sarcastic. Don't show anger. Even though you're so angry with somebody, you've got to learn how to control it. Okay? So there are many ways to actually overcome, but sometimes we have to say, because we are emotional beings. So that is why we have to be mindful of emotional barriers. Sometimes you're so angry with somebody we can't control and then we shout. So we shouldn't. It takes practice. you need to be really, really attentive, and it takes time to actually slowly. So you set goals for yourselves. When you find yourself in situations where that you're going to get angry, you count 1 to 10. There are ways to actually overcome this. All right.
Oh, okay, thank you for answering. And then we have a question again from Mr. Agustupa. How
Okay.
to communicate correctly and effectively with the leaders whose mindset is still feudal and rigid in communication? Thank you.
Okay, this one also actually, yeah, sometimes it's the personality of the superior or employer that we have. So it's always best to ensure the right time when you need to ask something from that person, and study the person first, what the person likes, what he doesn't like, what are his expectations. You can actually ask from his secretary or people who have worked with him in the past. So sometimes the rigidness can be overcome if you study the person's background, and you will know when actually you want to speak to him. Because like I said, in order to approach such person, you need to understand that individual. So you need to ask a lot, maybe his personal assistant, if you can assess his family. But normally you see his work pattern, you study. Sometimes these people would have worked in a different company before coming to you. So you need to do some background study. That is my advice. I do that actually with any VCs that come in. We actually see a pattern, and from that pattern, you can actually study how to approach the person, because very important, you need to know what he likes, what he doesn't, meaning in terms of work, and meaning in terms of his communication with his subordinates. I worked with 4 big bosses before. So, and each boss comes with a different expectation. There are some who like you to talk, some who doesn't want you to talk, some who wants you to just answer yes. So you have to condone to that. That avoids communication breakdown. I hope I'm giving sound advice, because it's hard. Yeah, I understand when you have a very rigid and very strict employer or a big superior. My advice is always asking his secretary and looking at the past, what he likes and what he doesn't, and what kind of methods, or when is the right time to approach him. Timing is always very important when you're actually communicating with these people. Okay, that avoids actually misunderstanding and a communication breakdown, and you not getting into trouble.
Okay. Okay, thank you for answering. And then we have a question. This is from Miss Sukanto.
Okay.
If we want to have effective communication with many people, do we have to understand each person character due to different personality, or do we use the concept of speak as we do? Thank you.
Right. So it depends on the context. If you're familiar with your listeners, then you don't need to do a background check, correct? Because you already know the nature of each individual. Like if you're in a company, you're so familiar with the team players. But then if you're first time actually meeting these people, I always do a background check. I mean, you can go as speak as you go, but it will result in some sort of communication breakdown. Like I said, because you need to understand what the listeners bring in. They come in with physical, emotional, cultural, semantic, different understanding. So if you do not do a bit of background check before you do your presentations, you don't know who your listeners are, you will actually experience some sort of misunderstanding. So for me, I wouldn't go on speak as you go. It's risky. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you're a very spontaneous and flexible person, you can actually change or maneuver the situation, then go by speak as you go. But if you're very, you're not so spontaneous, you're not flexible, you can't, you don't know how to harmonize the situation when it turns ugly, then always do a background check. Who you're speaking to, who you're meeting, especially when it's the first time. So that's my advice.
Okay, thank you, kids. And then we have a last question. This is from Mr. Solikan.
Okay.
As we know, we have a 2 personality in each person, extrovert and introvert. How for people with personality introvert can confidence to make a conversation? Thank you.
All right. So remember, one of my slides actually said that you can actually, of course, for those who are extroverts, it's very easy to have an open concept because they will speak out in public with no difficulty. They have a side of self-esteem, they're confident. But for those who are introverts, that's why I will always go for one-to-one. Pull the person aside. Make an appointment. Ask them to come and see you on a personal or in an enclosed room one-to-one. Then that is how you actually deal with introverts, actually, because they will never function well when it's in the open, because they get anxiety and, you know, it's we need to be understanding on that. So introverts, always I would recommend one-to-one communication, not communicating or giving them instructions in a group, because that will cause a communication breakdown and misunderstanding and might embarrass the person as well. Okay, so one-to-one for introverts.
Okay. Thank you so much for Dr. Sharmini. I guess no one else asking again. May we go to the next session to take a picture for documentation?
Okay, no
Yeah,
problem.
for Miss Febri, you will handle this session for time a picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Okay, thank you, Miss Novita. Okay, for those who haven't activated the camera, you can active or open the camera first so we can take photos together. Okay, let me count from 1, 2, 3. Once again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. I will return the event to Miss Novita.
Thank you so much for Miss Febri. Yeah, before I am closing this event, you will say something before for Dr. Sharmini?
You want me to say something?
Oh.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for our audience and our participants to attending this event class until the last session. Thank you so much for Dr. Sharmini Abdullah for sharing your knowledge. I hope this event will be beneficial and sharing new knowledge for all audience. Thank you so much for all participants for attending this meeting today. I hope we can meet again with Dr. Sharmini Abdullah in the future with the collaboration online or offline project. Okay. Thank you so much for Dr. Sharmini Abdullah. Thank you so much for all participants.
Thank you very much as well, Novita. Thank you so much to everyone as well. And hopefully we meet again. Right? Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you. Bye. Wassalam.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you.
See you all again. Bye.
See you. Bye.
So I will leave. Okay, thank you so much. All right. Bye. Assalamualaikum. Take care.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.